Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for being with us. In May's primary election, only about 1 in 3 school levies in Ohio were approved. Compare that to the previous year in 2025 when almost 2/3 of levies were approved. This sharp decline in voter support is causing some district leaders to wonder whether, among growing calls to reform or even abolish property taxes, voters are tiring of funding public education via tax hikes at the ballot box. But most public schools rely on these levies and the property taxes that they come from to fund their operations, paying for everything from salaries to building maintenance to future improvements. Today, as our IdeaStream Explores Property Taxes series continues, we'll hear from Northeast Ohio school leaders, a tax policy expert, and IdeaStream's education reporter about the role property taxes play in funding Ohio's schools and what it could mean if they're reduced via reform or cut altogether in a world where property taxes are banned entirely. In studio, we have Sarah Ellicott, board chair for Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Sarah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Also with us, we have Adithi Srivastava, a tax researcher for Policy Matters Ohio. Adithi, welcome.
Thank you so much.
In studio with us as well, we have Connor Morris, IdeaStream's education reporter, who's been covering this topic for a long time. Connor, thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And joining me by video call, we have Scott Russ, board president for Canton City School District. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone.
If you would like to join the conversation, you can give us a call at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org or message us on Instagram. We're at The Sound of Ideas. Sarah, I'd like to start with you and ask how much of Cleveland Metropolitan School District's funding is from property taxes?
Yeah, over 40% of our funding is based on property taxes, and that's set by state policy.
Okay. And the district is closing and merging almost 30 school buildings next year. It's laid off dozens of staff. We know this. This has been something that Connor's been following very closely. Would you have to do this if school funding was not reliant on property taxes or if school funding was more equitable?
We might have to do it at some level. The reality is that our student population has declined, right? Folks are having less kids, and so that's an issue for us when it comes to school seats. But what we have seen over the last, 7 or so years is a really steep decline in state funding for public schools, and it's impacted us here in Cleveland. So overall, I think that, about almost half, like 47% of our funding used to come directly from the state. Nowadays, it's about 1/3 that we're getting from the state. So we're seeing sharp declines on that front, and that means that school districts have to rely more and more on the local community property taxes to fund our districts.
And has that piece of that funding piece in property taxes, has it come up to meet that gap or is there a shortfall there?
It hasn't. There's definitely a shortfall. And, I think you've probably talked about this before, but we, as property values increase, taxes on property do not necessarily increase at that same rate. And so the school district is impacted by that as well.
Okay. Scott, what are the primary services or non-negotiables, if you will, that are funded by Canton City School District's annual budget beyond staff wages?
Preschool funding, athletics. Athletics is huge in our community, as you probably well know. Any type of athletic cuts or even pay to play would result in a large portion of our student population transferring to other districts. But we provide a ton of different programs for our community. I mean, we have homeless liaisons, we have a lot of special ed, adult ed, career tech programs, all programs that, we fund through our general fund.
I can certainly attest to that. Having grown up in Canton in the Perry Local School District, athletics are a major piece of the puzzle there, and I do believe that is exactly what would happen if there were to be a cut there. Thanks for sharing that with us, Scott. Connor, for this particular story in the IdeaStream Explorers series that you worked on related to education and property taxes, you talked to Axe Ohio Tax co-founder Brian Massey. Brian wants to ban property taxes in Ohio. What's the reasoning behind his movement?
Yeah, and it's a very interesting conversation, right? Because it's kind of pitting folks who are pro-public school, against others who are like, I'm being taxed out of my home. The whole Axe Ohio tax movement is really an attempt at trying to spark this huge statewide conversation, which it has, about how we fund local government and schools. So, Brian Massey, the co-founder of this movement, he said, we're not anarchists, even as they say we want to end all property taxes, which would completely blow up Ohio's, the way Ohio funds townships, schools, cities, counties, etc. But they say that they really want to change how we approach, funding local governments. And so they're saying, we're hearing from retirees who can't stay in their homes anymore. They're forced to sell their homes early. He's saying, that these recent kind of record increases in property values have led to huge spikes in property taxes. And so they're saying, we believe the state is not spending its money wisely. We believe that, schools and even local governments are not spending the money wisely. They've only been getting more money, and we're not seeing much benefit from it as taxpayers. And so this is their whole argument, is that we really just need a huge change. We need to see what could change.
We have seen some legislation passed in the Ohio legislature. Adithi, you looked pretty extensively at House Bill 186. That's a new law which legislators say will provide tax relief to Ohioans related to minimized school funding and how those two pieces work together. What do you think this will do for families in vulnerable communities?
So House Bill 186 was passed as part of a larger kind of property tax, quote unquote, reform package in January. And there were, I believe, like 4 other bills that were passed alongside it. And the commonality between all of these bills is that they can't guarantee that the relief that will come will be targeted towards the people who are actually at risk of losing their homes or unable to pay their property tax bills. And it's going to be impacting, school districts all over the state, and pulling relief often from their coffers rather than providing it through the state in a way that's more equitable. So what House Bill 186 does is it limits tax increases in school districts that are on the 20 mil floor. And these tend to be, these are non-urban school districts for the most part. They are already kind of getting the minimum amount of funding that they need. And, if they were flush with cash, you would expect their bond ratings to be, great all over the state. And across the state, what we see is these school districts have middling bond ratings. They're not necessarily they don't have these incredible reserves. It's just the way that our levy cycle works. And so you're giving this relief through basically pulling, money from school districts rather than doing it through an equitable form. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is if you are someone who can't afford your property tax bill and you live in an urban district and you're not on the 20 mil floor, you're not really benefiting from this. If you're in Cuyahoga County, you're not on the 20 mil floor for like most of the places you live. You're not benefiting from 186. And if you're in East Cleveland, that's an example of a school district that won't be benefiting from this bill. But if you're in Indian Hill, one of the richest, areas in the state, you are benefiting. And it's hard to argue that folks that, are in the richest area of the state are the ones most in need of property tax relief. Schools are providing, incredible services to their students with already a bare minimum budget often. To say that, this is the area that we need to be pulling relief from is just really ludicrous. We can target relief to the people who need it the most and do it based on income or their ability to pay their taxes. We have 2 bills in the House and Senate to introduce a property tax circuit breaker, for instance. And what this does is it would target relief to the people who need it the most by tying property taxes to ability to pay your income. So if your property tax bill exceeds, let's say, 5% of your income, it would kick in, and then the state should offer a refundable tax credit through their general revenue fund to the people who are most affected. And this is something that we could raise, through our income tax and through our general taxes, and shift in a more, state budget level rather than forcing schools in their smaller budgets to have to do this for the people who are impacted.
Adithi, you mentioned a couple times the 20 mil floor there. Connor, I'm going to ask you, can you explain that to us?
I'm going to try my best to. So the 20 mil floor is basically, there's an exemption in state law where if you were at the 20 mil floor, so you only levy 20 mils of taxes, and a mil is equal to, I believe, like $1 for every $1,000 of property tax value of your home. And so if you're at this low level of levies that of mills that you're levying, then whenever property values increase, you are allowed to see an increase in revenue from those mills that you're levying. If you're above this 20 mil limit, whenever property values rise, your schools receive basically the same amount of revenue. And then if you're at the 20 mil floor, you actually see an increase. So what this means basically is if you're at the 20 mil floor, which a lot of schools in Ohio are, you are going to be seeing, folks that live in your community are going to be seeing unvoted tax increases. So your taxes are going to rise even though you didn't vote for a tax levy, basically. And that is really one of the biggest concerns for state legislators and for residents lately. It's kind of why when we saw these record property value increases after the pandemic, it's why we saw such large tax bill increases for a lot of folks, is because of the school districts that are at the 20 mil floor, which, not always, but sometimes are wealthier districts. That's where we're hearing kind of the most complaints in the state right now, in terms of, large property tax increases.
Thanks for breaking that down for us. Now, Scott, Canton City School District accelerated plans to consolidate and cut staff earlier this year because of issues with school funding. Has the level of state funding for schools driven this decision in Canton City Schools?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we lost our targeted assistant funding, which basically is funding that school districts receive at a certain percentage of people who live at or below the federal poverty level. Canton City Schools is the 8th poorest district in the state. What it did is back in 2023, we renewed a bond issue that was passed in the 90s to build 2 new schools and eliminate 5 districts. And we have the circumstance that Cleveland does. In 2000, we had over 13,000 students. Last year, we were at right around 7,800. And even if we bring every kid back from a charter or parochial, we would still be in that 9,000 range. We operate too many buildings for the amount of students that we have. We eliminated our 5 oldest buildings, which cost us about 40% of our heating and cooling costs, which in the long run saves our taxpayers money and saves the district money, which to me is a good use of dollars. Because as you know, if you ever owned an old house, and I love the window commercials, if your windows are 20 years or older, then you need new windows. And I just chuckle at that because the buildings that we closed, some of them were up to 80 years old. But yeah, we thought we were going to stay ahead of the state curve by doing this. And all it did was bring us back to the state curve. And yeah, we definitely accelerated that program, getting buildings closed. Unfortunately, that also eliminated jobs and our use for people. I mean, I attended a seminar that Dr. Eugene Sanders, and I know everybody on this call is probably familiar with him. Schools fund people, places, things in that order. We've done it through attrition. We haven't had any mass layoffs like there has been at other districts. So we are continuing to look at other ways to save money. We are continuing to look at ways to stay above and ahead of the state curve. However, the next biannual budget coming up, depending on what happens in November, is going to get interesting, to say none the least. And I'm glad you asked Connor to explain the 20 mil floor, because that's a difficult one to explain.
It is complicated,
Yeah.
certainly. That's what we I don't know what the word is. I can't even come up with the word. We count on Connor for that. That's what it is.
Thank you.
I do want to share an audience member email if you want to be a part of this conversation. We are talking about property taxes and how that plays into school levies and school funding here in the state of Ohio. To call, the number is 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org or send us a message on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Kathy writes in, if the state wasn't giving $1 billion to private schools, individual school districts would not have to have frequent tax levies and property taxes could be reduced. Why does the state no longer value public education? I don't know if that $1 billion figure is exactly what's accurate there, but Kathy's point is about private school vouchers and public tax money being used for private schools. Sarah, is that something that you think has had an impact on Cleveland Metropolitan School District?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, our neighboring districts across the state, across the region, there's a lawsuit that we're not able to have standing in because we have a different voucher program, but we have seen, an incredible amount of dollars continue to go to vouchers specifically, which are what families can use to attend private school rather than the public school that they might otherwise attend. And what we often see is that those vouchers are not based on need, right? I think maybe the original intent when the vouchers were created was to give people more options for different types of schooling for their kids. But at this time, you get the same amount of dollars regardless of whether you're a multimillionaire family that would have sent your kids to private school either way, or you're a family in Cleveland making $30,000 a year.
Yeah, and there's about, she was correct, the caller was correct. It's about a little more than $1 billion a year going to school vouchers in each year now in this current biennial budget cycle. And, you do compare that to how much public schools are getting. It's about $13.75 billion per year. But still, $1 billion is a big drop in the bucket, and the argument is, well, why can't we just give this to public schools, and then do we even need charter schools then, or do we even need to fund private schools? And so in Ohio, we've got, and in a lot of the rest of this country, we've got this really seen a lot of expansion of school choice since the 90s. And so there is the argument that, yeah, if we have these kids going to public schools instead, the money would be following the kids. Schools are funded based on each kid that they have. So would we be seeing this current kind of crisis of lots of schools across the state closing buildings, laying staff off, and predicting future budget shortfalls?
Connor, you wrote in May that only 1 in 3 tax levies this spring were successful from your reporting. Any insight into why that happened and what might need to change before school systems see more success?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. Every school district is different, and people have long memories. I think I've said this before in this program. Something that happened even 15 years ago in a school district, people remember that. At Parma School District, for example, they haven't passed a new levy in I believe almost 15 years or so. And some folks are still remembering the county corruption scandal of 15 years ago, where a former board member was kind of caught up in that. And so there's still a long-standing perception for folks like, my school district's not spending money wisely. I don't think that they deserve my money. It's a really complicated question. One thing that school districts can do is we're hearing a lot of concerns from residents about administrative spending, about ways that they could cut back. And schools, a lot of schools actually, like Sarah mentioned earlier, are laying staff off. They're closing. Cleveland has one of the most ambitious school consolidation plans in some would argue the country right now. So they can make efforts to say, hey, we are doing things to cut back. We are cutting by attrition when we can, positions that we don't need. So there are ways to kind of build trust back.
Speaking of that trust, Sarah, I want to ask you about some of the levies that have passed in Cleveland. There were school levies in Cleveland in 2022 and in 2024 that passed. Major cuts are happening now with that funding that was approved in those years, and some are alleging that funds have been mismanaged. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think we've been really open and transparent about our financial situation. We're required to report on it every year in public session. I think, I'm somebody who really values public education. I'm the recipient of a public education. I believe that my neighbors and everyone in our community benefits from an educated populace, and I believe that our children have the right to an education. And we saw 66% of our city voters vote for a school levy. So I would argue that we still have pretty strong trust. The shifts, some of the things that Connor mentioned, we're working hard to do right by our schools, by our kids, and to manage our money properly. And if we're, I think my colleague in Canton mentioned, the closures and the idea that you're heating, you're cooling, you're maintaining properties that students are not sitting in because they're not there. And so for us, that was, Connor, I don't remember the word you used, but, one of the maybe most ambitious consolidation plans. I think at the end of the day, that took courage on the part of our board and our district, because it's not easy to make folks uncomfortable in the short term and to, bring about change. And I've been saying this way too often lately, but someone recently told me that there are two things that people hate: change and the way things are. The only way we get things better is that we are willing to make some really difficult changes. And, I think at the end of the day, we've seen Cleveland schools progress for the positive, and we'll continue to be aiming, in that direction as we go forward.
We have a call now from Mark in Canton. Mark, welcome to the Sound of Ideas. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I guess your basic question is why the public has lost faith in public education vis-a-vis private education and vouchers. And my answer to that is I'm part of the public, and I'm 71 years old, and I see kids that have recently graduated and at a cash register, perhaps working, and if you hand them a handful of change, they can't tell you how to make up 54 cents. And that's why I've lost my faith in public education. Basic math isn't being taught, and what else isn't being taught? That's it. It's that simple. So I don't know what's being taught, but it's not basic math. It's not the 3 R's: reading, writing, and your arithmetic or whatever. So that's my comment.
Thank you for the comment, Mark. We appreciate your perspective. We have an email now from Connie in North Canton. Connie writes, Republicans claim schools are top-heavy with management. How has Canton responded to that claim? Can you respond to that for us, please, Scott?
Yeah, in my 9 years, we have cut, oh, Jesus. We have cut down administrators by over half of what we had in my 9 years on the board. Now we have the basic administrators, our curriculum directors, our, superintendent, assistant superintendent. We have to have a principal and an assistant principal at every building. But yeah, I do agree with them. I mean, our unions, when we go to negotiate our contracts, that's one of the first things they ask, how many administrators that we are looking at cutting as well. So no, we've cut a tremendous amount of administrators. We now have people doing double and triple the jobs they do and assuming those responsibilities.
I want to give both of our school representatives here an opportunity to respond as well to the caller, Mark from Canton, talking about what he believes is or is not being taught in public schools. Sarah, do you have a response to that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly schools are teaching math. We're teaching all of those things. I think that, we've seen, especially through the pandemic, we've seen a lot of burdens fall on schools as far as addressing situations and societal issues that families face, that children are faced with. Anything from poverty to housing displacement to lead poisoning, all of those things impact our kids. And so when we think about public policy, we really have to think more broadly than, I totally agree. We want our kids to be proficient in math, just like the caller. We can agree on that point. But there's a lot more that we have to think about in public policy issues when it comes to making sure that our kids are prepared for the world.
And Scott, do you have a response to the caller's comments?
Yeah, no, I agree with my colleague in Cleveland that, everything has to meet state standards in this day and age. And unfortunately, that's one of the things. I mean, when kids take tests now, you do it with a calculator. You don't sit and count things out. I mean, another thing I get all the time is cursive writing. Well, unfortunately, our kids take a state test on an iPad. They have to know how to type. That's why cursive kind of gets put on the back burner about teaching cursive, because you have to have a third grader taking a state test, typing it out on a time limit on an iPad. So the priority now becomes teaching kids how to type and use an iPad. It's unfortunate where everything has gone in this day and age, but calculators now dominate, especially on the math side of it. Back in our day, we had to prove our work before we could use a calculator, and nowadays it's just standard practice.
Connor, can you tell us a bit about the different standards between public and private schools?
Sure. Very briefly. Private schools in Ohio, they don't have to necessarily take the same tests. They don't have to report results back to the state, generally speaking. There's a host of things that they don't have to follow. I mean, they can pick and choose which kids they accept, generally speaking. There are more regulations on private schools that do accept vouchers. but still they are their own entities. And generally speaking, whenever you ask the state about this, they say, or legislators specifically who are advocates of private schools, they say, well, if families don't like what's going on at their private school, they could just take their money elsewhere. So that is kind of the accountability system in Ohio as it stands anyway.
Okay. And Connor, in your conversation with Axe Ohio Tax co-founder Brian Massey, did he lay down any alternative options to property taxes for bridging the funding gap in services taxes support?
Yeah, so one of his biggest things was that he believes that consolidation could occur. Like Vivek Ramaswamy has kind of floated that idea statewide, and I believe we've got a cut from Brian here kind of talking about that a little bit.
We can consolidate schools. I think we should also look at the number of taxing authorities or communities that we have in the state. Can we do some consolidation there?
And so the idea is that, if we share services, we can cut back on kind of government bloat and duplicative services, so to speak. He also said, generally speaking, that it's not, they really, on their website even, they're very clear that they don't have a huge plan for what to do to replace property taxes. They say, we're going to put the ball in the state's court, but then they've also been very critical of the state's funding priorities. And so there's kind of a catch-22 here of we are not happy with what the state's done, but it's going to be on the state to find a way to replace this. And I talked to an expert who said generally when states cut back on property taxes, they have to be replaced by something. So it's a sales tax or an income tax.
Aditi, let me ask you about that. If it were not to be property taxes and school levies, what could be alternative sources of funding for public schools?
I mean, first and foremost, I think we should evaluate the state's role in this and actually ask, are they doing enough? That is the point that we should be starting from. Ohio's school funding system has been ruled unconstitutional time and time again, and we do not currently fully fund our fair school funding plan, which is what the Supreme Court mandates is the way, Ohio should fairly fund its schools. And so there are, deficits that schools across the state see through the state not funding this plan. And we've cut income taxes in the state like pretty regularly for the last, we focus on the last 2 decades in my organization, but it's been going on for much longer. And a lot of the benefits of those cuts go to the wealthiest households. And so we're not only, giving these cuts to the wealthiest of Ohioans, we're putting the responsibility of this, then funding these local services that everyday Ohioans rely on local communities and often the poorest Ohioans. And so there's been a shift in the way the state has taken this responsibility. And I've heard time and time again, through the reduction of the state responsibility, we're just not sending dollars down to Columbus so that people can figure out how to fund their services locally. No, you're taking options away from communities and you're having to force them to go back to the ballots again and again and again to make sure they have adequate funding for their services. And one of the things that's cropped up recently is the school district income tax, and looking at that as an option to fund schools in particular. And we have a forthcoming report on it as well that I urge folks to check out. But the school district income tax isn't a great solution to replacing property taxes. One, currently under property taxes, businesses also pay, a portion to schools that would be removed if we moved to a school district income tax system. Two, under our current state income tax system, folks can exclude the first $26,050 of their income. You can't do that under a school district income tax. So those poorest Ohioans would actually be paying more if you move to that system compared to funding it through the state. And that's really unacceptable if this is an issue about affordability. And additionally, if you look at where these school district income taxes are passing, it's mostly in Northwest Ohio where there's more kind of agricultural land. Places outside of that haven't seen great passage rates. In Parma, I know Connor mentioned they also, I believe, tried to pass one just in the May elections, and that hasn't passed. There isn't this interest in going towards this particular funding stream. And also, the other thing I'll include is you're excluding, again, more wealthy people from paying their fair share if you move in this direction. An earned school district income tax, there's 2 systems, earned and traditional. The earned system covers less types of incomes, and so it wouldn't include like capital gains, which we know tend to be, realized by the wealthiest Ohioans. So again, the systems that we're moving towards will again continuously put this burden on the lowest earning Ohioans, so the state has to step up and take its responsibility.
Oh, just real quick. Yeah, during this last election cycle, we saw a lot of schools opt for income taxes, and they were not very successful.
Okay. Sarah,
Yeah,
please.
I just want to add, thank you, Aditi, for that. That a school income tax will only make funding more inequitable, right? The property tax across different districts is already inequitable. It's been ruled that by the state, and if we're relying on each municipality's income rates to fund schools, that means schools are going to continue to have disparate funding across Ohio. And the piece around the state's responsibility is important. The whole state benefits from public education, and like Aditi said, what has happened is that over the last several years, the state has created a flat 2.5% income tax where we used to have bracketed income taxes. And for example, a millionaire, multimillionaire would have a slightly higher tax rate, something like 3.25%, I think, than those of us those in our community who have lower incomes. And so that's a big part, I believe, where we are losing state dollars, is that the state is allowing income taxes to be collected at the same percentage rate, no matter what income level you're at. And that's where districts like ours lose out.
Aditi.
We're seeing, states across the country contend with this issue as well. Property taxes have gone up across the country. And so there are states that are now, as Sarah said, like assessing their income tax levels, their income tax brackets, and questioning, is the state doing enough? In Massachusetts in 2023, through a ballot initiative, they passed a millionaire's tax and have raised $3 billion since the passage of that surtax. And those dollars are now distributed in between public school services, transportation, and childcare, three things that, we could really need right now. I know that there was a CNBC rating published for the state of Ohio, and while we rank first in business, we rank like 35th or 38th in quality of life, incredibly low in education, and we've seen a persistent push for, childcare for quality education, and we can't do that if we don't adequately fund these services.
As we ramp things up here, just a final question for our school leaders, and I'll start with you, Scott. You live in the community where you're working in the school district. How do you feel asking voters for property tax increases through levies?
Funny, I was going to bring that up. As school board members, here's the issue we run into, and this is why property taxes are skyrocketing. As federal and state dollars are cut, we have one of two choices. We either cut programs, cut people, cut places, or we go back to the local voters asking for more money. We don't have any other choice. Either choice we make is a bad choice to probably half of the people. And yes, as a property owner who's 22 years ago, when I purchased my house value has gone up almost 3 times according to the county auditor. So yes, I pay more in income tax. When we have to go and we, knock on wood, have not had to do this since 2021, ask for an operating levy. But yeah, I have to face my neighbors and have those conversations with them about why we're going to ask for more tax levy dollars. But those are the two choices that we face. We have no other way to raise revenue. We have no other way to sell more product as a business would. The only thing we can do is try to do things better and encourage our kids to not choose a parochial or a charter school. We don't have a lot of choices in what we do and how we do it. And for the people that say school districts waste money, our district has been audited 7 of the 9 years that we have been on here. And all our audits come back clean. And we are, as my colleague in Cleveland said, every school board meeting, we share our treasurer shares our financials, and they are a public record. So anybody that questions that, our financials are a public record, unlike the charters and parochials. It's one of the things that I don't know if Connor touched that or not. They are not subject to a state audit. And they are not subject to public records requests.
Scott, thank
All
you for
public
sharing
schools
that
are.
with us. We appreciate it very much. Sarah, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share on
Yeah,
that
I
issue?
mean, same thing. I think it's a tough choice either way. You're either asking for more dollars from the public or you're making cuts, and neither of those things are the preferred way to move. But for us at the Cleveland School District, we've really worked to make sure that, when we do bring levies forward, they're as low as possible. Our last levy was about $3.73 a week for the average homeowner. More than half of the taxes that it increased was on businesses, so most of the dollars came from businesses. And, it's what we have to do because of the way that the state formula is set up. And that's why you see most districts going in for property tax levies. And when we look at states across the U.S. that are succeeding in education, and Aditi mentioned how much we've dropped in our education ranking here in Ohio. It's been an immense drop in ranking. When you see districts and states that are successful in public education, they're usually the ones where the state is providing appropriate funding.
That's all the time we have for this portion of the conversation today. I want to thank our panelists for being with us. Scott Russ, Board President for Canton City School District. Scott, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.
With us here in studio, Aditi Srivastava, tax researcher for Policy Matter Ohio's. Aditi, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Also, Sarah Ellicott, Board Chair for Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
And our IdeaStream education reporter, Connor Morris. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll take a quick break now, and when we come back, we'll bring you the latest installment of The Menu, looking at grocery stores, which ones are thriving and which ones are closing their doors for good. This is The Sound of Ideas. I'm Stephanie Haney. We'll be right back. You're with The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thank you for staying with us. Several weeks ago, it was announced that the Heinen's grocery store in downtown Cleveland, located in the historic Cleveland Trust Bank building, will be closing its doors. The store reported that it's lost $18 million over the last 11 years it was open. The last day of operation will be July 31st. That closure means that Constantino's Market, which has been operating in the Warehouse District in downtown Cleveland for just over 20 years, will be the sole grocery store serving downtown Cleveland residents. The closure raises bigger questions about the profitability of grocery stores, how much of a population is required to keep a store afloat, and the overall changing habits of shoppers. That's the focus of today's installment of The Menu, our series produced in partnership with Cleveland Magazine, focusing on the region's food scene. With me for this conversation today, we have Andrew Revy, the CEO of Constantino's Grocery Store, as well as Immigrant Son Brewery in Lakewood. Andrew, welcome.
Good morning.
Great to have you here. Also with us, we have Dylan Stewart. He's the editor at Cleveland Magazine, with us often for The Menu. Dylan, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And we have Mark Rulli, co-owner of Rulli Brothers Italian Markets and Grocery Stores, joining us as well. Hi, Mark.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here. Now, before we begin, I should note that we did invite Heinen's to be a part of this conversation, but they did decline. If you want to join the conversation, you can call us at 866-578-0903. You can also email us at soi@ideastream.org, or you can message us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Now, Andrew, last year was a big anniversary for Constantino's, 20 years in the Warehouse District. How have you seen things change in the downtown location over those 2 decades?
There's been a lot of changes, not the least of which is the population growth. 20 years ago, when the store first opened, we were, I think, leading the charge of growth economically to entice people to move downtown, and the revival of moving back to the urban core. But also the biggest change since we've opened has been the impact of COVID. Again, massive change in population, but that was more the daily transient population, the daytime workers and employees that were downtown pre-COVID that just aren't there post-COVID.
Are we seeing a return back in that foot traffic? How is that looking lately?
Significantly more than during COVID, but it's still not the pre-COVID numbers. I think if I'm, as far as I know, pre-COVID, it was roughly about 125,000 transient daily population, and we're probably about 50% of that post-COVID. So it's been a very difficult few years.
Well, I can tell you this. When I moved back to Cleveland, which was in fall of 2019, just before COVID, Constantino's Market was my lifesaver. I lived on West 9th Street. The salsa there, to die for. So just throwing that out there from my personal experience, it was very beneficial for me as someone who didn't have a car. at the time when I moved back from New York City and didn't have a car. So I know that's a factor that will be in consideration for a lot of people with the closure of Heinen's downtown and be coming over there more. Dylan, what has your reporting in Cleveland Magazine shown in terms of the ability of businesses to survive in the downtown area? Restaurants, coffee shops, bouncing back from the pandemic, struggling. What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's pretty much everyone that we talk to is struggling a little bit, in terms of retail, restaurants. It's we recently saw the closure of Clevo Books. I also talked to James Orlando, who owns 2 coffee shops in the Playhouse Square district, and he said that there's about a fraction of the foot traffic that he was seeing in that area. I talked to Rocco Whalen as well. James told me that he really felt that Heinen's was the main driver between like East 17th to East 4th, the main driver that he was seeing with foot traffic going by that were bringing him into his coffee shop in the Statler the Brass Moon. And Rocco Whalen is really excited about Sherwin-Williams coming down, but really most office workers were only back in about April, and he hasn't seen the sort of influx of business that he was hoping. He's still optimistic, and he said for him it's been an uphill battle, but there's ways that he's gotten creative, such as adding a $20 express meal, which is like a half sandwich, soup, salad, things like that. But just the pure sense of needing to get creative, I think, speaks to that lack of foot traffic, lack of happy hour business, lack of lunch business.
Mm-hmm. And with Sherwin-Williams, they're referring to Sherwin-Williams headquarters being in downtown Cleveland in the public square area and having a policy that's been widely reported that their workers do need to return in office, so bringing those people back into the downtown space. Mark, Rulli Brothers started out in downtown Youngstown more than 100 years ago, did move to the suburbs where you've had 2 locations for the last several decades. Can you tell us about the decision to move to the suburbs?
Well, at the time, it wasn't exactly our decision. The downtown Youngstown is a lot different than the Cleveland history. Population shifted, was maybe beginning the shift at that time. This was the late 60s, and they began what was called urban renewal. And they started focusing more on the government offices down there and creating more parking. Essentially, that's how we got forced out of the area. But obviously, the population was shifting to the suburbs at that time. My dad anticipated that, he just passed recently, and he was the leader of the company for over 60 years. Mm-hmm. And that's how we ended up in the suburbs, and we've transitioned now. We're 6 decades into the suburbs, but there's a lot of different things that are going on in the industry in general, especially for independent grocers. And we're seeing this in the suburbs. And I'm sure it has a lot of truth to what's going on in the urban areas as well, as far as a lot of regional, national chains moving into the area. I think they're all in the middle of a turf war, and we're kind of caught in between, but at the same time, independent stores are really, you find your niche. We have our own banner. We don't run a corporate banner. We have an identification with the community that's gone on now for 100 years.
Mm. Some of those things that you're talking about there with the national change, we know that Kroger just bought Giant Eagle. That's something that will certainly have an impact. We'll have to wait and see what that will be. Andrew, you're in the restaurant industry and also in the grocery industry. We always hear about tight margins in restaurants. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like in the grocery world?
Sure. I'm sure Mark can speak to this as well. The grocery business is extremely tight margins. In 2025, the average grocery net operating margin was 2.1%. So to put that into perspective, a $100 cart brings you about $2. And so the business is predicated on volume, and that's why foot traffic is extremely important. These margins and with rising costs, really eat into it. And so, once you have that cart and that ring, you still have to take care of labor, you have to take care of rent, utilities, and there's not much left over. And it's become extremely difficult and extremely tight. And when there's been a shifting change in population, and the rising costs, it's made it extremely tough to operate.
And the Constantino's Market Building, is that owned or rented?
We rent there, yeah.
Okay.
We're in the Bingham Building, and we're a leasehold operation.
Okay. And for you, Mark, one of your locations is owned and one of them is rented. Do you think that makes a difference? We know that the Heinen's location was rented here in downtown. How does that play into things?
Well, I think the way you plan for your budget obviously goes a lot more into owning your own building. We have a pretty large, we have like 15 acres that our building's on. We have a 52,000 square foot building. So you have all those extra costs, expenses as they're called in the industry, that aren't factored into your product cost or your labor cost. It's a whole separate cost. And in some ways, it's good to have your own building because you obviously have your own control over everything. And in other ways, you know, when you have a landlord, they take care of a lot of those expenses for you.
Dylan, you're a former downtown resident. What do you think about the closure of downtown Heinen's? What will that mean to the downtown Cleveland area?
Yeah, so I lived downtown. I lived in the Statler, and I worked in Playhouse Square. So Heinen's was a lifeline to me. And I lived downtown sort of, I think, in what a lot of people are looking at as the glory days, like 2016, 2017, 2018. And I've joked that I didn't even need to turn off the stove to run across the street and get, you know, an ingredient I might have forgotten. And Heinen's was so often where we ate lunch, you know, and it would be hard at lunchtime during the work week to sit down, to even find a table to sit down at to get prepared foods and things. But I've talked to some residents, some friends who live down there now, and you know, they really feel like they've lost an essential lifeline, especially for those who live more on the east side of downtown. Already, it was hard because Heinen's had started shifting their model to more of a grab and go model, and had less options for full-fledged grocery shopping. It was also very expensive, and with expensive rent, a lot of young professionals living downtown, a lot of people were already leaving downtown to get some, you know, canned goods and things like that, maybe at an Aldi's or a Dave's, and grabbing, you know, more of the fresh produce and things like that at Heinen's. So I'm interested to see maybe if that kind of model is more fitting for downtown. I know that's sort of the model that you guys have. But for me, I was doing a lot of my grocery shopping there just because it was so convenient.
Mm-hmm. Well, Constantino's did celebrate a very exciting anniversary, 20 years. So, Andrew, what do you see for the future of Constantino's in the warehouse district?
Well, we hope to be around for 20 more at least, and I think that it is a good possibility, and there is still a vibrancy downtown, and there still is a decent amount of people, and there are always shifting landscapes for business. I think Heinen's leaving does leave a large hole in the retail space, and you know, I hope that there is an anchor tenant that goes there as well, because we are part of the downtown. We want to celebrate another 20 years. So we do think that some good things will be happening. I think the city of Cleveland is, along with other partners that are vested in, are working really hard to find another anchor tenant, and we're here for that, and we're here for the continued growth. So
Sure. All right, this is how we close out the menu. Every single time we ask you what you're eating this weekend. We'll start with Dylan because he's a veteran, so that you too have time to think. Dylan, what are you eating this weekend?
So I'm really excited about the Coyne family, who owns Crowley's and some coffee shops on the east side and things like that. They just opened an Irish pub called Carney's, and you know, that my family's part Irish. Their dive bars are actually Irish and Croatian, which is the two sides of my family, which is just, you know, I never thought I'd see the day, but they do a great job there. So I'm really excited to go to Carney's and try that out in Menor. They've got a lot of fresh fish options and you know, the classic Irish fare. So
Okay. Andrew, besides Immigrant Son, besides Sophia's Kitchen and Bar, where are you eating this weekend?
this weekend, I'm actually going to make family dinner at home. Grab some great stuff from Constantino's Market, and I'm probably going to make my daughter's favorite, and we'll probably linguine and clams.
Okay, linguine and clams. Sounds good. Mark, how about for you?
Actually, this weekend, I'm going to have the opportunity to take my wife on a little trip, and we're going to Lake Chautauqua and probably eat at the Harbor Restaurant there, the older restaurant. And I have not perused the menu yet, but I'm sure it's going to be good.
Okay, well, here's a plug for our Easy Day Away series. We just featured Chautauqua and Jamestown in New York, so you can check that out. We've got another Easy Day Away series coming up next week, so look out for that. Thank you very much for our panel here for this edition of The Menu. Andrew Revy, CEO of Constantino's Market, also of Immigrant Son Brewery and Sophia's Kitchen and Bar. Thank you, and congratulations on the anniversary.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Dylan Stewart, the editor of Cleveland Magazine. Dylan, as always, thank you.
Always great to be here.
And Mark Rulli, co-owner of Rulli Brothers Italian Markets and Grocery. Mark,
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it. If you missed any part of today's show, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU, and you can find every episode of The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts and on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. To get the last word on today's topics, you can email us at soi@ideastream.org or find us on Instagram at The Sound of Ideas. Yesterday, we aired our latest Sound of Ideas community tour focusing on property taxes, which we taped Monday night at the Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. We had an engaging conversation with a lot of different perspectives shared, and our reporter, Richard Cunningham, got great feedback from some of the people in attendance. One of those, David, weighed in with these thoughts.
I struggle right now with paying all levels of taxes, and the jump up in the property taxes was a hit, but I just know that there's a need out there for what the taxes support, so I pay them. I think it's just important that we support our communities because there are a lot of people more in need than any of us.
And here are some thoughts from Judy, who also attended.
Well, I think we do need property taxes, and I do think that we need reform. And we need to do it in an intelligent way, and definitely have our legislators start to hear the people rather than listen to us and then do their own thing. So I really think that reform is important, and look at how we can relieve people of some of the burden of taxation.
If you missed the community tour, you can find that on the Sound of Ideas playlist on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page and wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on the Sound of Ideas, it's the Friday Reporters Roundtable with Mike McIntyre. This week he's joined by Anna Huntsman and Andrew Meyer, as well as Karen Kausler down at the State House News Bureau from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Stephanie Haney. Thanks for keeping the conversation going. I'll see you back here next week.